All right, I think it's time to start. We are waiting for a few more people, but it's actually 4 o'clock, so let's kick off and they can come in as they go. Welcome to today's webinar with us here at Furhat Robotics, where we're deep diving in the topic of social robots and education. And as some of you know, we have been running a webinar series here during the fall, focusing on both aspects of the robot and our platform, and also deep diving into different industries. And before we even begin, I'd like to point out that this session will be recorded, so I hope that feels okay for everyone. My name is Susanna Dillenbeck. My role here at Furhat Robotics is to work with all our corporate clients, big and small, everything from startup to multinational company, and help them use our social robot Furhat in the best way possible. With me here today in the webinar, I have my colleague Nils. Maybe Nils, you want to come here and just wave? You'll meet him later on in this session. And we also have a very special guest with us today. It is Jonas Bäckelin, Technology Integration Specialist at the City of Stockholm within the Education Administration. We're super excited to have him here with us. He's going to talk to you later about both a specific project that our two organizations have done together, and also about his view on both opportunities and challenges within combining social robots and education. But for those of you who have not met with us before, we are a social robotics startup from Sweden, stemming from research at the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. And we're a very diverse group of entrepreneurs, programmers, designers, and visionaries, researchers who have one joint vision of using technology in a new way to help humans, just as we think that you on the call perhaps want to do within your respective area of expertise. And today's session, we're going to start with myself giving a little bit of an introduction to social robots in general and to the education topic. And then we're going to shift a little bit back and forth between me and Nils, with me guiding you through 3 specific areas of opportunities that we see, and Nils showing you some practical demos of that. And after that, we're going to hand over the mic to Jonas for him to walk us through some of the cases that we have done together. And we'll save some time in the end for Q&A, but if you have any questions throughout this session, please pop them into our Q&A tool here in Zoom, and we'll try to answer them as we go. So with that being said, I'm going to just share my screen with you here again. Let me see. There we go. And for some of you that have followed our webinar series, you're going to think that, oh, Susanna is going to show her introductory slides again. And yes, I am, because I think it is important that we all start on the same page. And that is, of course, knowing what a social robot is. So when we talk about social robotics, we're talking about physical robots that are built to interact with humans in a social way. And this distinguishes them a little bit from, say, virtual chatbots that can be social but not physical, or physical manufacturing robots that are physical but not social. And social robots, they come in many different shapes and forms. I've added a few examples here on the slide for you, and you can see they can be anything from very human-like to furry robots that are similar to animals. But all of these have one common denominator, and it is that they are working in the social aspects of interaction with humans. So looking then at the topic of social robots and education. So this is a topic that has excited our team for a very long time. We see there are so many opportunities to create engaging and individualized learning curriculum for all ages in all types of learning environments, because after all, education, it's not only in school and in university. Education and training that happens throughout life, although it's easy to think about it in a school setting. And a social conversational robot can be used in, for example, learning new languages, learning how to read. It could be a discussion partner for different subjects. It could help you solve a math problem or train a new employee before going out on a new work mission, for example. So the opportunities are so big. Some of these ideas, however, are quite visionary. They might not be possible to deploy right now with the current state of technology. So for this webinar, when me and Nils discussed this earlier, we decided that let's focus on 3 specific areas of opportunities today that are actually possible to do within the current state of technology. And by coincidence, these happen to be focused on more of a school setting, but let's think broad if you represent another type of organization. So these 3 areas of opportunities that we wanted to walk you through are, first of all, something that we call learn and repeating knowledge. So using, for example, gamified tools or different kinds of interactions to practice both and learn both new knowledge and existing knowledge. Secondly, we wanted to discuss with you or walk you through how can we use social robots to stimulate reading and creativity and explore how different engaging and expressive characters can stimulate our fantasy and create some inspiration. And lastly, we think that social robots are a great tool to get started with programming, and we are calling it actually the next generation of programming, and we'll get back to why we're talking about that. So before we look into this, I think 2 things that are worth noting. One is that we see our robot as a tool for educators, teachers, trainers. Just like an iPad can be a tool, a computer can be a tool, a speaker can be a tool. So this is another part in that tool set. And the robot could both take the role as a tutor or leader when educating a group of users, or it could be a student peer. So taking part in a class and discussing with another user or a child, for example, on the same level. So we can keep these 2 different roles in mind, either be the tutor or facilitator of learning or a peer in the learning process. But with that said, let's look at this first one, and I'm soon going to also hand over for Nils for him to show a little bit more on the robot. So when we talk about learning and repeating knowledge, as I said before, we mean using games or robot facilitated tasks, both to learn and discuss completely new topics or practice knowledge that one has already gained during a lesson or a session. And one example of that could be what you see here on the screen. This is an application that we call the card game. And here the users, who in this instance happens to be children and more than one, so one of them, they can pick a topic of their choice, say the highest mountain in Europe, and they have to order the cards based on certain criteria. For example, the lowest mountain to the highest mountain. And the robot in this case is a guider and a facilitator. The robot is asking the children questions, it's coming with hints, trying to help them stimulate their thinking process, and also making sure that the turn taking is equal, so that it's not only one user that is talking a lot, but that everyone gets a fair chance of taking part in this game and practicing this new knowledge. So I'm going to pause here for a little bit and hand over to Nils, who's going to show us this in practice and talk a little bit about how this could be useful in a learning session.
Right, thank you, Zana. So interacting with the robot is really a physical experience. And we will see later on that it might be a little bit blurry experience doing this online, but hopefully you will be able to see everything clearly. So I would like to imagine now, or I will count on you to imagine yourself, sitting in the scene that you saw there in the image of 2 or 3 people sitting around the table with the robot and the screen in front of you. So let me change my view here, so we can see the screen in front of us, and we have the robot, we have myself, and we have you there back home. So let's start this.
In this game, we are supposed to sort these inventions by when they were invented. The earliest invention here and the most recent invention over here. Would you like to help me with that?
Yes.
Great. Which invention do you think we should start with?
The airplane, maybe?
I hear that humans have wanted to fly since they first looked up in the sky. So I really think that the airplane was earlier than the instant noodles. Or what is your belief, Charlie?
Yeah, I think they probably think the airplane was maybe somewhere over here.
Good. Let's reorder the cards accordingly.
Yes. And what do you think about the instant noodles?
A lot of modern materials are used to package instant noodles. So I think that the instant noodles is the most recent invention. So the card should be moved over here. Or what do you say?
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I'll put it here.
Great. Let's reorder the cards accordingly.
And do you think the stamp is more recent than champagne?
I think people paid the messengers directly for a long time before stamps existed. So I think it is right that the stamp is more recent than the champagne. Or what is your opinion, Nicholas?
Yeah, I think that seems about right.
Great.
I think we can check the solution and see how many points we get.
Do you like champagne?
Yes.
Cool.
I think.
Me too.
All right. Can we check the solution if you have the answers?
If you think we are done, press the button to see the results.
Okay.
Okay, let's check the solution. Only 1 point.
Ah.
Not so good, perhaps. I did tell you that the instant noodles is the most recent invention. You should have listened to me.
Yeah, you did. Maybe we should have listened to you. So that was a little bit of a sped up version of the game. But I think you can get the point of the kind of interactions that you would have with the robot. And when this was being tested in a school, the students were tasked with creating the game. They would get a theme, for example, elements in the periodic table, and then they would come up with in what manner to order them. For example, how common the element was in the human body, how well the conduct electricity, the atom number, etc. And they would then research the correct answers, add them to the skill, to the interaction in the robot, and also add a couple of these hints and clues. And then their peers would play the game that they have designed. And the idea here being that learning will happen when the students research the answers and play each other's games, where they will be reasoning and arguing with the robot and with each other, rather than the robot explaining the concept of elements in the periodic table. So the robot doesn't know the answers. In this interaction that we did here, it happened to be correct, but it could just as well be wrong. So the students have to be able to compare alternatives and reason and argue for their beliefs. And this kind of ability to facilitate conversation and increase engagement is really the value of the robot in this interaction, and doing so in a multi-party setting. But it could also perhaps, as Susanna mentioned, make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak in interaction. So this interaction is to facilitate learning. There is some research to back this up. Children will retain more information from an interaction with a robot, with a social robot, compared to other systems. But this type of interaction could potentially also provide the teacher with better material to evaluate the student's knowledge than what they would have access to if they just have a test score or something like that. Of course, it would be best if the teacher would sit down with the student one by one and sort of evaluate them. But as we know, the teacher resources are limited. All right, so that was a little glimpse into this interaction and how it can be used in schools and how it has been used in a school trial that we did before. So maybe Susanna, you can tell us a little bit more about the next use case that we were talking about today.
Yes, for sure. Thank you very much, Nils and Furhat. So we said in the beginning that we would cover 3 different areas of opportunities. This was the first one, but let us continue to the next one, where we talk about how we can stimulate, reading, creativity, fantasy in a larger or broader extent. And here we're thinking about how can we use the robot's expressivity and possibility to take on different characters to both tell exciting stories and co-create new stories with one or several users. And this could be made-up stories, fantasies, or also show, for example, historic events or other more true realistic events. And you on the call, you probably know better than me how important reading and storytelling is for children's development or everyone's development. And our suggestion is not to replace humans with a robot for reading these stories. Parents, teachers, librarians out there, you are amazing. But we also see that this could be, as Neil said, an exciting complement using the expressiveness of the face, the different voices, languages, etc., to create characters that can spark imagination and creativity in places where humans or adults do not have the time to sit down individually with groups of children or teenagers for that matter. So could this be a complement to spark these different ideas? At least that's what we think and hope. And we're actually running a project right now, a smaller, I would call it on the side project, where we're building a storyteller robot. It's still in quite early phases, but we did a beta user testing session here in the office a week back, and we invited a few children that we know. So we wanted to show you just a quick snippet of that video to make you see how children could react to meeting the robot. So Nils, I'll hand it back to you to share that.
Jag vill sätta den här. Jag vill sätta den här.
Hejsan, välkommen. Jag heter Furhat. Vad säger du? Ska jag berätta en historia för dig?
Ja.
Finemang, gör det bekvämt för dig. Jag har 2 historier. En om Jack och en om tidsresor. Vilken vill du höra?
Jack, tidsresor.
Vad sa du? Men hur som helst.
Tidsresor.
Ska vi ta Jack eller
Ja.
tidsresor?
Ja, tidsresor. Jack.
Bra val. Då kör vi.
Det här kommer att bli det sämsta sommarlovet någonsin, muttrade jag och tryckte näsan mot fönsterrutan. Bussen hade åkt hela dagen och nu var resan nästan över. Där utanför susade Gröna Lund förbi, men det brydde jag mig inte om. Jag skulle ändå inte få besöka en nöjespark. Så är det att vara föräldralös, tänkte jag dagarna. De senaste 9 åren hade jag bott hos sura släktingar och på ruskiga barnhem. Jag hade flyttat så många gånger att jag tappat räkningen. Och nu var bussen på väg till Stockholm. Där skulle jag bo hos en avlägsen släkting hela sommaren. Men vilken släkting? Det visste jag inte riktigt. Jag hade frågat på barnhemmet, men föreståndarinnan hade bara svarat med ett elakt flin. Du ska bo hos en hemsk gubbe, har jag hört. Han hämtar dig på bussterminalen, om du har tur. Plötsligt stannade bussen och busschaufförens röst sprakade i högtalaren. Detta är slutstationen. Avstigning för samtliga passagerare.
So this is a radio play that we are adapting to the social robot.
Ryggsäcken och klev av bussen.
And the only one beautiful thing about this, that the only programming that's really necessary to create this kind of interaction. Whoops, did I click the wrong thing there? There we go.
We can begin with you
kind of
just
sorry, I think I opened another YouTube video there. Let's close this one. Okay, there we go. So as I was saying, the beautiful about doing this adaptation of this radio play on the robot is that it's not really necessary to program the interaction. You could just adapt it to the robot, and you would add facial expressions, perhaps like we did, or we're doing, integrating it with lighting to create a little more ambient feeling around the story, and then really draw the kids into the story. You can also mention there that the robot mentioned something about the time traveling story. It was a little bit reluctant to tell that story, and that's because we hadn't really implemented it at that time. And that story is a much more like interactive story, so that branches out and allows the child to take a more active part in the creation of the story. And this type of interaction, I think, is something that you can adapt to other areas where perhaps you're talking about a certain topic and there are different branches that you can go into, and not necessarily just having to be in this storytelling scenario. And I mean, this is typically targeted to the younger audience. For a little bit older audience, you might need to have other types of interactivity. And the value of the robot here is really to bring characters to life and have these highly engaging interactions with the robot, and have the children feel enthusiastic about this topic and this field, and maybe inspire them to want to create their own stories. I will come back to that, the ability for the students or for anyone to create interactions with the robot and then be part of it. We're going to show you how that can be done using this simple tool that I will show you. But I'll let you, Susanna, talk a little bit more about that before I go into that part of that demo. All right.
Great. Thanks, Nils. And in the meantime, you will have time to prep the last thing. Because we have one more area of opportunity that we wanted to talk to you about before we hand over to Jonas. And that is what I mentioned before, that we see that the robot is a fantastic tool to learn and explore programming. And I even went so far as calling it the next generation of programming. And what do we mean by that? Well, we think that the next generation of tech development will be increasingly focused on how humans interact with machines, and specifically machines that can speak and interact in a human-like way. And therefore, we think that it's critical that we, both as adults, but also the next generation of both programmers and consumers, get a better understanding of how interactions with robots are created, and more importantly, how to make them meaningful and valuable with respect for the individual, and make them in an ethical way. So we actually have a simplified way of building interactions where you don't need that much programming skills. It's a simpler GUI that we wanted to quickly show you now, just as a spark of imagination. What could, well, both we as adults that maybe don't have a programming background, but also children, or at least teenagers, start working with when it comes to creating skills for social robots. So maybe for the last time, Nils, I'll hand over to you, and then it's time for Jonas.
Great. So I wanted to show you this visual programming tool that we call Blockly. And I stayed up last night and created this little interaction that you see in front of you. That is an interaction to practice the multiplication table with the robot. And it's something that, I mean, it took me like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something to create. And this is something that is simple enough for a student to create on their own. Maybe a little bit older students, but still for anyone to create without any really necessary programming background. And if you worked with teaching programming to children, I'm sure you will see there's some potential there to simplify the interface and make it even easier for anyone to learn to program social robots, and for younger students to get a chance to use it. And what you see here is not really a finished, polished tool, but really our first version of how this can be used. And we use this one both ourselves internally when we prototype interactions, but we see that this is a tool that can actually be useful in an educational setting or an educational scenario. So what's going on here is that I have a couple of boxes here on the left side that I have just dragged and dropped onto a main canvas. And I have these three different states where I will start my interaction, and I will ask, do you want to practice the multiplication with me? And if they say yes, we will then transition into this state where we will first randomize the numbers that should be multiplied, and we will make sure to remember the correct answer and the counting points if you're right or if you're wrong, and so on. I won't go into all the details of how to create interactions using Blockly. We have I actually have some videos on that on YouTube that you can check out. We also did a webinar previously on the SDK where I think we went a little bit more into detail about Blockly. So let me actually run this one, and we can try it out and see if I manage to build something that actually works.
Do you want to practice multiplication with me?
Yes.
All right, get ready. Here we go. What is 8 times 4?
24.
24. Sorry, that was not correct. You got 0 points. Do you want to play again?
Yes.
Great. Another round coming up. Here we go. What is 5 times 9?
45.
Correct. Point for you. What is 3 times 7?
27.
7. Sorry, that was not correct. You got 1 point. Do you want to play again?
Misheard me there. No.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. You got 1 point. Do you want to play again?
No.
Okay, no worries.
All right, so you can see there's still some things to improve, right, on this interaction. And I think that's the thing that can really, you know, excite people when they're building these kind of things, that it's so easy to get started, and you will try it out, and you will adapt and improve on the interaction, and really have this experience of building a little program, but in the form of a social robot and a social interaction. So I'm pretty sure that for you at home, maybe didn't feel this was a very impressive interaction, and really is, you know, practicing multiplication table. Is that what you want this robot for? Of course not. But I think in the eyes of an 8th grader, the experience of building something like this, trying it out on their peers, learning, adapting, and involving their application could potentially be an experience that could, you know, really launch their interest in robots, in mathematics, in programming, in the STEM field or technology, you know, overall, in general. So we really think that this is something that we can capture the imagination of youth, and, you know, in the world they will grow up in, you know, these kind of systems, they will be everywhere. So we hope that this will be a good introduction for them to get their eyes up for this kind of technology, and that they can actually be a part of creating the future. Yes. Or what do you say, Susanna?
I agree, and I think there's no better person to talk about that than our guest, Jonas Bäckelin. As I mentioned in the beginning, he is with us today from the Education Administration within the city of Stockholm. Jonas is a very exciting person. He is on a mission to inspire educators to incorporate technology in their classrooms and lesson plans. And he has experience from education programs both within Microsoft and Google. And at least personally, I'm very excited to hear what he has to say around robots, social robots, and education in the school system. So I cannot welcome you up on stage, Jonas, but I can go on mute and invite you to unmute yourself. So please take it away.
Great. So let's just start with, can you hear me and see the screen in front of me? See if I get that one up.
It looks great.
Great. So first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I've been listening in, and a lot of things when we did this project, all of this technology wasn't in place. So I'm excited to hear all the development, and what Nils was saying was that we are actually looking at social robotics as an interface where the students are communicating through social robots, and that was actually what happened the last year, when it was a bit before Christmas, we started a project where we were saying, well, what about social robotics in the classroom situation? And I should also say that when we did this, it's called Smart City of Stockholm. That is a case of looking for innovative solutions. And we also had this that the aim would be to have some sort of a teacher assistant, because there's so many things you can start looking into. And we decided to go for upper secondary school, that is Stockholm Science and Innovation School, and also a year 5 compulsory school that is out in Bromma called Nya Elementar. And just to give you a glimpse about what we were doing here was that we said that, well, let's look if we can use social robotic as a form of digital storytelling. So already students, as most of the ones who listen are teachers, know that by using technology to, instead of just using text to communicate, we can now use different ways of creating digital storytelling. It could be a Minecraft environment, it could be a video clip animation, a lot of these things. But then we thought, what about if this actually is a social robot in the classroom? And to test this, we needed to see it from the student perspective, if they were actually managing to create stories with this tool. And also we needed to see what the teacher experienced. And it was quite an intense project. We called it proof of concept, and it was displayed on the SET fair in Stockholm in, I think it wasn't this year, so it must be 2019. The skill, you probably heard Nils talking about this, that to develop a full functioning system, it's a lot of development. So we got offered a skill that was called the greeter. And the greeter is more or less built as a receptionist, but we wanted it instead to build a teacher assistant. You also heard Nils, and in this reference to something called SDK, which as far to my knowledge is a bit like the interface we managed to let the upper secondary school teachers to use. So they could add pictures, they could add text, and they could create scenarios within this system. This is now in Swedish, but you still get the idea of that. The first part of it was like, we need to build a lot of knowledge. And we were actually saying to the younger students that the robot has no knowledge. You have to teach the robot in order for it to explain something. And that was their first mental barrier to understand that the older students, they looked into machine learning, but they also realized that without a really, really advanced knowledge base, a robot is basically not very good as an assistant. And we just look at the conclusion here now is that the younger students, they actually use a normal PowerPoint to organize and design the scenarios, and then the older students help to put it inside of the robot through the interface. But you can see here that one of the things that we actually asked them was about what was about this human interaction. And a lot of them said that it felt, like you see in bottom left corner there, more human, and you can feel compassion. And also you could see the next one to the right of it, where you really think that it was harder to be distracted when a social robot, because it has the facial expression and look straight into your eyes. So I really can see that this was one of the big things. And also the students very quickly wanted to play with this, that when an answer was wrong, they started to do what we call nudging, like saying, oh, sorry, it was wrong, but try again. And the same thing when it was correct, they said, great. So it was using a lot of the facial expressions. And when we look at the older students, as expected, the skills that we managed to build was not very covering everything, but I still found it really interesting to work with robot programming. And now my plan is that we have a bit more of a discussion, because I think there might even be questions in the chat, and I know me and Nils has been discussing a lot, where are we going next? And this is our vision at the moment, where we are actually very interested now in using the skill that is called storyteller, because we can see how the storyteller, with these interactions where you actually decide directions, you can practice real life situations with the robot. And we believe maybe that's where social robotics is going to be, instead of actually being like an encyclopedia. So with that, I'll stop the presentation, and I'll let Nils or Susanna moderate our Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonas. So, dear audience, please do not hesitate to add questions in our Q&A tool. But as we're waiting for that, Jonas, I think it would be very interesting to hear what learnings did you get that you did not expect, both on the positive side and maybe on the challenging side. Usually when you go into a project, you have a lot of ideas and expectations, but what was the actual outcome in terms of your learnings there?
Yeah, something we discussed a lot, and that was part of the design phase, was that to communicate and make the flow easygoing was quite hard. So when we created all these training scenarios, you could see there was images and there was text. Sometimes Furhat was reading the text and saying, but we decided to have a screen as an extra interface, because to just answer back, I mean, I could even hear when Nils said, if you don't speak loud, you might say 27, but the robot will hear 7. And those things, especially, we actually, in the upper secondary school, we managed to have group rooms so that it was quiet, and it worked much better. But if it's in an environment like in a classroom, it was hard for the answers to get clear. So that was one of the things that we felt a need for, using a screen to communicate and not only word.
Great. We have a question here from Natalia. What is the role of the robot in the storyteller scenario? You touched a little bit on it, Jonas. Do you want to elaborate on your thought of what you meant about that scenario?
Yeah, but what is happening, again, it's hard to measure skills or training, but we have seen a lot of need of practicing your skills, because at the moment we were using it as a tool to build up new knowledge. Furhat was telling stories and explaining things, was showing videos even that the children had produced. But the storytelling skills is, as Nils said, I call it branching scenario, where depending on where you decide, you then get other options. And the most common way of doing it is training what they call like the customer support staff. If you have an angry client, or you have things like that. And the same thing with students, that when they are training realistic scenarios, like maybe have a discussion about environmental sustainability and things like that. The idea is that depending on what they choose, they should be questioned.
Super. Thanks for that. Another question that I would be curious to hear your thoughts. We're now in the COVID pandemic. All around the world, the education systems are looking different. Some are, schooling from home. Some are still in schools. Here in Sweden, we have our schools open. But one good thing about the robot is obviously that it is, if I call it COVID safe. How are your thoughts of using social robots in these times that we are now? We need to adapt to remote schooling, but also being many people in an environment, but still keeping distance. Do you think that this could be useful in any way, or what are your reflections there?
It's a really hard one because there's a lot of debate about hybrid learning. And the thing is that if you are teaching fully on distance, obviously you don't have teachers in a classroom and it's hard to have a physical robot. And the next thing is that if you are all in the classroom, the teacher is there also. It's also like you said earlier that we don't want to replace the teacher with a robot. But then it comes this when it is a hybrid scenario. And regardless if it is a social robot, there is still situations where learning starts with actually the technology is there to support students to get help. You call it adaptive learning. So I believe that Furhat, it was actually shown in our experiment that the students felt less nervous to try different answers because they know there wasn't going to be graded. So that could be, and I think you also done other experience with an unbiased interviewer and things, that it's that side of it.
Thanks. So maybe a more visionary question. If you could dream a bit about where social robots and education in a broad sense is in 5 or 10 years, what would be your dream vision if assuming that the current state of technology would become more stable and the conversation would be more human-like and easier to pick up also these details. So what is your vision? What do you think could happen?
Yeah, but it's a hard one because it all depends on where we are heading. And as I say, this isn't 5 years because this is more what we're hoping to do next. It is, like we said, the teacher assistant that would really save time for teacher. That could be a scenario when the students work in smaller groups and the social robot will be part of the group and obviously, first of all, make sure that everyone can elaborate on their thoughts, but also we've been talking about that even though the robot isn't trained in the subject, they can actually act as a moderator. And moderator would actually be saying, well, Lisa said this. Pelle, do you agree with Lisa? And that's a bit what Nils also showed, that the card game, the social robot doesn't really need to know the answer. It just needs to provoke ideas and questions and to elaborate on your thoughts.
Great, thank you, Jonas. I think, Nils, we are standing here a meter away from each other. Did you have one last piece of input?
Yes, so it's a comment there what Jonas said about that collaboration between the robot and the attention you can get from users. And this is a story from when we did that school trial with that class in the compulsory school, the 5th graders, where this was this scenario where there were 2 or 3 kids that are standing in, interacting with the robot, and they were playing, or they were learning from that story that the robot was telling them that other students had programmed. And there was one kid who was standing 2 or 3 meters away and wasn't really participating, but all of a sudden the robot looked in his dead in his eyes, and you can see how he used like physically was drawn into that interaction and became a part of that group that was interacting and talking with the robot. And I think that's really the power of the physical robot compared to other kinds of systems, avatars on screens, or voice assistants, or even a TV with a show on. That really, that power and ability to drag people and get their attention and create engagement with students. So that's an image that I always sort of have on my retina of this little interaction happening in front of my eyes. So that was really cool to see. And I always like to point that out when I talk about this, because like I said, it was a really powerful moment, and I think it really shows the value of what the robot can do like a physical robot can do.
Yeah, and it was quite fun with the older students. They also added what you call it, like they wanted the robot to speak a bit, what you say, the local language and things like so they were adding a lot of comments like "Yay! Great! High five!" and things like that. So that's what they probably were missing from the teacher normally.
Exactly. You can develop what you are missing in your teacher. No, just kidding. I think, dear audience, with that being said, we had planned for a 45-minute webinar. We are now on minute 46. So it's a dark Tuesday afternoon here in Stockholm, and it's getting time to wrap up. I think behind you, Jonas, we can see the city skyline. You're on a boat. I'm a bit jealous, actually. But thank you so much, Jonas, for participating. Thank you, Nils and Furhat, and most of all, thank you to everyone that listened. We hope that you enjoyed it. We will also put this up on our YouTube channel, so if you have any colleagues or friends that you want to share this with, we will post that link in our social media here in a couple of days. So thank you so much for joining. It was great having you here, and we look forward to continue the discussion online in a separate channel. Have a great Tuesday. Bye, everyone.